Hello, I'm Deborah Cedillo Dugan. Employee communications is vital now more than ever. City Manager Ed Zuercher debuted Live with the City Manager last week, a virtual weekly internal communications platform where employees can ask him questions directly. Now, to ask a question, all you have to do is click on the chat button on your screen and type your question and send it to the host/panelists. Today's topic is teleworking and plans for return to the office. Laura Bays, the Human Resources Director, will be joining Ed today. Ed?
Welcome everybody to join us for the second Live with the City Manager. Today we're talking about telework, as Deborah said. While less than 1/3 of our employees are teleworking, that's still a lot more than we've ever had teleworking at the city. So it's a good subject for us, and clearly if you're on this podcast or on this webcast in this way, you're familiar with this technology. Just to start off, Lori and I are going to chat a little bit. I want to talk about, the overarching thing we've been talking about is to be flexible, accountable, and realistic. I've used that before. FAR, flexible, accountable, realistic. And certainly flexibility has been the key thing for all of us during COVID. We also have to remember our accountability for services, and then just being realistic about the world we're living in and how we have to get our work done. Up to now, we've provided information about the temporary telework program, and the last date we got to was October 16th. Now, we got to October 16th as a target date because we were watching what was going on with our Phoenix Union High School District and its feeder schools. That's a large part of Phoenix is served by either Phoenix Union High School District and the 14 or the 13 districts that feed into it. And they have been on remote learning in those districts from the beginning of school until the first quarter, which ended the week of October 16th. Now, Phoenix Union just announced that it was going to go remote for a second quarter, mostly because of the rates of infection in parts of Phoenix Union High School District, particularly Maryvale, parts of South Phoenix, parts of East Central Phoenix, are higher than the state recommendation. And so that's concerning to all of us because that indicates that we still have people exposed to COVID in our community, and Phoenix Union is going to go remote. However, other schools are starting to do things differently. Even some of the feeder districts in Phoenix Union are going to go to hybrid or in-person learning even sooner than waiting for the second quarter. And Glendale Union and some of the other high school and elementary school districts that serve the city of Phoenix residents are also starting to go back to school. So we've got to start thinking about what's going to be our response, our plan here this fall. And we haven't come to a conclusion yet, but Lori and I have been talking about, how do we need to approach this? What's sort of our way of looking at this? I know it affects almost all of you who are on this webcast today. So Lori, let's talk a little bit about what's going on here. The council has talked now, yesterday or Wednesday of this week, the council talked about having a plan to reopen our libraries, our parks, our senior centers. They're wanting to get some ideas about how to plan for that. Not that we're doing it imminently, but they want to know how to plan for it. How are you thinking about planning for the eventual return of our staff into more office environments?
Yeah, thanks. That's a really great question. And that's something that I'm getting asked about quite a bit these days. And one of the things that I want to emphasize today is that I think we really need to start shifting our mindset a little bit. We've been focusing on these specific dates that we're working toward. And right now, our toward, and you mentioned, is October 16th. But we need to shift our mindset toward more of an operationally based decision making, and it's not a one size fits all. It's a staggered and rotational type of mindset that we need to, or a plan that we need to have as we shift our mindset toward our operational needs and what we need to do to be able to serve our community effectively. And so many of us know this, but in case you don't, our city has over 400 different program areas that provide services both directly and indirectly to our community. And all of those services are different. And we can't just have one approach for our currently teleworking employees. We really need to think about it as it relates practically to the operational needs and the services that we need to provide. So We need to think about which positions are more conducive to telework past that October 16th date. Some of our positions absolutely are, but many of our positions, have had some deficits or have struggled in a telework environment, and yet we've maintained that because we were going through a surge period of the pandemic. Fortunately, we're coming out of that surge, and while we're still in a pandemic, we have an opportunity to think about, okay, which of our employees who are currently teleworking can effectively work from home perhaps part of the time, but may need to come back into the workplace the rest of the time. Or in some cases, we may even have staff members who need to come back in full time, especially in those places where we're reopening facilities or moving toward a need for full-time customer service staff to be in place there. So it's definitely not a one size fits all. We need to be thinking about, how we can best work together, realizing that we will have employee needs to address as well. So we understand that our employees are in different situations personally as well. We have employees who have health risks, who maybe by virtue of their age or pre-existing conditions, they have a greater risk for contracting COVID, and we want to work with those employees and help them develop a plan to be safe. We also know that we have employees who have school-aged kids, especially elementary school-age kids. Many of those school districts, as you mentioned, are still not operating in person and have at least a hybrid model where on some days those kids are in school at home online. And we need to also work with those employees to help them address those needs and develop a plan. So we're prepared to do that in HR, and our HR liaisons are ready and willing to work with people whenever it happens that we start to ask people to come back into the workplace.
Right, so important because we've got to balance a couple of things, right? First of all, we have to serve the community with the things that they depend on us: clean water, safe streets, answering the phones, all those things. And at the same time, we have to keep employees safe, and keep our community safe. And how we do that is really important. And we've been talking about, this isn't an on-off switch. We're probably going to have to transition slowly back into an environment where the office is important, or the field is important, because we have to provide those services. And we've learned a lot about what works with teleworking. We've learned a lot about what doesn't work with teleworking. We know that some people have really, really had to work a lot more as teleworkers. Others, they're not able to do everything that they were doing before. So we just have to weigh all that out. And that's what we're going to be doing over the next 30 days as we try to figure out, what's the approach where we provide service for people and keep our employees safe. And, we've learned a lot about telework in the last 6 months now, and how that does and doesn't work for our services.
That's right. And HR, in partnership with the city manager's office, is reaching out to each and every department who has active teleworkers and talking with them about the different employees that they have teleworking, how that's going for them, what they think about how soon they might need that individual to come back in, and also, does that need to be a full-time basis? Can it be a part-time basis? And then which of our positions might be more conducive to teleworking longer term? And we're putting a program together that'll put some parameters around that, including an AR, because we always need some good bureaucracy, as you mentioned last time.
Have to have an AR, yeah.
Right, and then, but also just some guidelines, some tips, some safety requirements that we need to have in place, all of those things to make sure that our employees who are teleworking, whether it's right now or whether it's in the future, whether it's 1 day a week or 5 days a week, that they're successful in doing that. And that's one of the things we want to talk about today with Maria, and I'd like to introduce her.
Yeah,
Maria Peck is one of our organizational development consultants, and she's here today to talk about staying connected while teleworking. And staying connected is so important for the success of a teleworker. So Maria, we'll turn it over to you.
I'm happy to be here today to talk about steps that you can take proactively to stay more connected while you're teleworking. I have some slides I'm going to share with you. And today we're going to discuss 2 reasons why staying connected is so important. I'll share some tips on how to increase your connection with others, and I'll provide some additional resources that can help you succeed as a teleworker. For many of us, teleworking is a new experience and it can take some adjustment. I've been working from home since March, and making those adjustments was more difficult than I expected. It's been 6 months, and as you can see from the beginning of this, I'm still adjusting. One of the biggest challenges of many teleworkers is dealing with feelings of isolation or feeling disconnected from coworkers. You may have heard the phrase out of sight, out of mind. Unfortunately, some teleworkers feel like they really aren't part of the team anymore if they're not in the same work location as their supervisor or other team members. We definitely do not want out of sight, out of mind to be your experience at the City of Phoenix. Teleworkers are valuable team members, and in many cases, they feel more productive, more creative, and more engaged in their work than they were in the office. But it's important to stay connected to others when working from home, even for employees who like the independence of teleworking. Without the natural visibility and contact of a shared office environment, it takes a conscious effort to ensure that teleworkers are kept in the loop, are recognized for their contributions, and are actively involved with their leaders and coworkers. Today, we're going to talk about the importance of staying connected for 2 different reasons. The first is that staying connected when teleworking is essential for meeting our job performance expectations. We need to perform our work to the same standards that we do in the office. Our internal and external customers should receive great service, whether we're in the office or at home. The second reason connection is so important is to meet our human need for social interaction. Now, this might be more important to some people than it is to others. I happen to be an introvert, and I usually enjoy being alone. But even for introverts like me, social interaction at work helps us to work efficiently, to build relationships, and to feel more engaged with the organization as a whole. I think one of the things I miss the most is just walking over to someone's desk to say hi or ask a question or to offer my help. Those quick interactions were more meaningful than I ever realized. So let's talk about some ways to stay connected that have a positive impact on job performance. First, we need to have clear expectations. Performance expectations need to be clearly established, and good communication is the key. If you're not sure what's expected of you, it can create confusion, and that can lead to feelings of disconnect. Supervisors have a large part of the responsibility here. To communicate what you expect, you can create SMART goals, just as you would for a PMG. Your assignments should be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-based. If you do this, your employees will know what to do, but they'll also know how to do it, why it's important, and when it must be completed. If you're a teleworking employee and your supervisor has not shared their expectations, then you should initiate the conversation. Be available and responsive. Make sure that your supervisor, coworkers, and other stakeholders know how to reach you. Telephone, email, and instant messaging should all be options. Let people know what your regular work hours are, and be sure to use out-of-office notifications if you'll be off work. The people who need to contact you should never feel like you're more difficult to reach when you're teleworking. By responding to emails and voice messages quickly and answering calls and instant messages immediately if you can, you build trust and credibility. Another suggestion is to schedule recurring conversations. If there are people with whom you work regularly, why not schedule weekly or monthly check-ins to stay connected? This is especially important for supervisors. You should schedule routine team meetings and one-on-ones with your direct reports at whatever frequency is appropriate. If you have it on your calendar, then you've made communication a priority. And then finally, communicate face-to-face as much as possible. Now, this might seem like a strange suggestion since you can't be in the same room as the people you work with. But if your computer has video and audio, you can use Teams or Skype or WebEx to make eye contact. Email is the most incomplete form of communication because it's only one way, and it lacks the nonverbal elements of communication that are very important, like tone of voice, body language, and facial expressions. When you can see a smile, hear laughter, or notice a confused expression, your connection will be more personal and the messages exchanged will be clearer. Now I'd like to share some tips for making social interaction a bigger part of your telework experience. Social interaction can help to relieve stress, maintain a sense of camaraderie, and just make the workday more fun. One way to add a social connection is to make time for small talk or chatting. This could be one-on-one or in small groups. I have an example. My supervisor holds a video team meeting every Monday morning. About a month after our team started teleworking, we had a meeting where there was no agenda, which I can tell you is unusual for us. There was no real business to be conducted. It was just nice to spend a little time together as a team and talk about whatever we wanted. It really helped us start off the week rejuvenated and ready to be productive. Another idea is to try a virtual coffee break with a friend. All you have to do is set a day and time to take a break together. You can talk on the phone or even use FaceTime. You can also try to incorporate some simple team building activities. There are lots of ideas for virtual team building activities online, and it doesn't have to be anything elaborate that takes up a lot of time. One example would be to have each person share a favorite photo. This is a great conversation starter and a fun way to get to know each other better. Another idea would be to pose a question in the group chat if you hold virtual meetings using Teams, and each person can answer the question sometime during the week. The question could be anything. You could ask each team member to share an item from their bucket list, or you could have them describe their dream vacation. Just make sure your topics are lighthearted and work appropriate. Don't get too deep. The point is to have some fun and strengthen your team. So, which of the tips I shared could you add to your teleworking experience to be more connected socially or to enhance your job performance? If you supervise teleworkers, are you confident that you've given clear expectations and that you're doing everything you can to bring your team together? The HR department has many resources available on our city intranet that can help you be more productive, more comfortable, and more connected as a teleworker. The teleworking resources are currently located on the Inside Phoenix in the Health Alerts section, since they were all introduced when the COVID-19 emergency began. I also recommend that you visit the Learning Resource Library, also on Inside Phoenix. There's a wealth of information there, including several articles for leaders about managing remote workers. Those can be found in the leadership section. Other sections include personal and professional development and health and wellness. You'll also find educational resources for families with children and some links that are just for fun. There are videos, music, games and activities, and other things to lift your spirits. I'd also like to announce some additional learning opportunities you can register for coming up very soon. In early October, the HR department will be offering a webinar for supervisors about managing remote workers. Specific details and registration instructions will be announced on Monday, September 21st. When you log into eCRIS self-service, in the announcements section, there will be a link where you can learn more and actually register for that course. And later in October, there will also be some additional learning opportunities to introduce the city's new telework program that Lori was speaking about before. Since teleworking has been so successful during the pandemic, the city is putting in place a more permanent teleworking program, which will include that new administrative regulation, a more structured approval process, and additional training for supervisors and employees. I hope you'll join us for one or both of those webinars. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maria. A lot of great information. Really, really appreciate it. And your candidness and kind of light fare. As a supervisor too, I make it mandatory for my employees do a FaceTime when we do a WebEx. No audio. I need to see expressions and body language and all that. Plus, I miss them all. But Ed, we do have our first question. Will the city conduct a citywide survey to evaluate employee feedback on teleworking prior to going back in this transitional mode next month? And this is either you or Lori.
Sure, I'm going to have Lori answer that, but first I'd just say thank you to Maria. That's just good information for us all. I really like her concept of scheduling communication to demonstrate the priority that it is. That's a great tip. And also the face-to-face. Email is the most impersonal and easily misunderstood, probably text as well, but only written. So having the verbal and the face-to-face interaction is great. But in terms of surveys, yes, we do intend to do a survey, and Lori, maybe talk a bit about that.
Yeah, so the survey that we are planning on doing is actually not directly to our employees, but we are actually surveying our departments, and hopefully they will be talking with each team, including the supervisor, who will get some feedback from teleworking employees. So indirectly, we are getting some feedback, but through the department heads about the telework experience, and then what the plan might be for each one of the employees who is currently teleworking. So we're going down to that individual employee level and looking at how conducive is this particular role for teleworking longer term, and if it is conducive, how many days per week and for how long. So those are the things that we are looking at with departments at this current time. We're
I think
also
it's an interesting. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, we're also talking regularly with our labor partners, and they are providing input from their perspective as leaders of their bargaining units as well.
I think it's an interesting idea, though, because what you're talking about, Lori, is we're doing a survey for departments to kind of understand on a bigger picture, the larger scale, how teleworking works. But I think the question maybe was more about the experience of teleworking. That I think is an interesting subject for a survey. And so Lori and I will talk about that. That may be something that is good to do. So thanks for that suggestion.
Yes, that is a great suggestion. And we have another question. Has any of the COVID funds been spent to optimize the HVAC systems to reduce transfer within the office? So basically, why spend the money now if a vaccine is coming?
Well, those are two different questions. So I don't know 100% what the money is, the coronavirus money is at that level. We did set aside, the council did set aside some COVID relief fund money for the physical work on our facilities, the plexiglass and other things, touchless switches, to make the workplace safer in a time of COVID to try to prevent the transfer. I'll have to find out about what we're doing with HVAC. It seems to me that we were talking about doing something, but I'll have to check with Public Works on that. Then the second question you asked is, why spend the money now if a vaccine is coming? Well, I think we don't know when a vaccine is coming. We don't know how effective a vaccine is going to be. And I think one of the things I've learned from this is, I think we got to be careful not to think that COVID is just a switch that's going to get flipped off. We use that on-off switch image a lot here. I think COVID is more like, if we think of COVID more like the common cold or the flu, we know that those are never gone. And every year we have to have a different kind of flu vaccine. And that vaccine is not 100% effective because there are different strains. Now, I'm not an expert in COVID, but I think we're better off thinking about COVID in terms of this is with us for the long term. And these things we've learned about hygiene and masks and those sorts of things will be aided by vaccines, but I don't think that a vaccine means that it's a switch is flipped and we're going back to the way it was before. We have to settle into this for a long time. So long way to get to. It is very much worth spending money on these facility changes that are going to need to be with us for a while.
And that is so true. And I mean, really, nobody knows. But I like what you said about the common cold, the flu. I mean, we have vaccinations for the flu. We all take it. We take that flu shot. But it's that big unknown. Well, we have just a few more minutes before we have to wrap. And I just want to remind people that you can ask your questions at hrc@phoenix.gov, and please filter through, because like I said, we do have a couple more minutes. I think we had another question coming up about, again, teleworking and about the existing conditions. It's kind of cut off here. Let's see, are we as supervisors to take employees' existing conditions into account when deciding whether an employee who is teleworking 5 days a week needs to start coming into the office one or more days a week? Yeah, that's kind of that's a hot topic.
Well, I think it's important. Lori, I'm going to have Lori answer, but we have to think about it this way. There are sort of two things we're dealing with here. One is what jobs are really conducive to telework, and then how much of the job is telework? Because again, it's not 0 or 5 days. There may be something in between. That's one question. And then another question is, what about the safety and health of the employees? Those sometimes overlap, sometimes they don't. But I'll ask Lori to take the rest of that.
Absolutely. And what I want to start with is everyone's situation is going to be different. So if you're a supervisor and you have a member of your team that you're concerned about, please talk with that employee and talk with the HR liaison from your department about those specific circumstances. But in general, Yes, it's not a all or nothing proposition. We have a lot of things that we've already put in place to help keep employees safe. And for many employees, that will be sufficient. For some employees, that may not be, and they may require staying at home longer because of their medical situation. But again, please consult with your HR liaisons. That's why we're here, and that's why we have that expertise to help with those situations. But we do have a lot of things put in place. If any of you who are watching today haven't been in a city facility since the pandemic began and since the teleworking program began, you will notice a lot of changes when you do re-enter a city facility. We have plexiglass up as barriers in a lot of our public reception counters and other workstations. We have markers on the floors to indicate proper distancing. We've removed chairs from our conference room so that there are appropriate number of chairs in there to maintain distancing. We're really using conference rooms very little these days because we're doing so many meetings electronically, and I think that will even continue with more people in the workplace. We have implemented a face covering policy, so all of our employees and all of our customers coming in are required to wear face coverings. We've got hand sanitizer stations. So there's a lot of stuff that's being done to keep employees as safe as possible. In addition, we're offering free testing to our employees and their household members. We're also offering a flu vaccine program that I want to plug real quick. Through September and October, we have flu vaccines available early this year. You're used to getting them during open enrollment, but we're doing them early this year because we've heard from public health how important that is. So I just encourage you to learn more about what the city is doing, and we're going to be putting out some additional communication on that, especially in advance of having some of our current teleworkers come back into the workplace.
Well, thank you, Lori. We're running out of time, but I do want to point out, I know this is a work in progress. We have City Hall, and then I'm assuming other downtown areas and offsites will also be receiving the same kind of treatment with plexiglass and whatnot, like community centers and whatnot. It is a process and a transition as we go along. So, Ed, any final thoughts? Because we do have to wrap.
Well, no, I think it's important to note the coronavirus relief funds are not just for City Hall. They are for all of our facilities, and the improvements are going out to all facilities. And so we just, Lori said it, we want people to be confident that we're doing everything we can to make the facilities safe and usable for our employees. When we need to come back, when we have to come back, and how we come back, we want that to be in the safest possible environment. I just want to say thank you to all the employees for the work you're doing. We're continuing to provide service to the community. We know this is a time where flexibility is key, and thank you to everyone for being flexible and for doing that. And thanks for tuning in with us today. So, Deb, back to you.
Thank you so very much, Ed, Lori, Maria. Thank you all. We've run out of time, so make sure to take a look at this next screen for more information. We have a lot out there. Thanks for joining us live with City Manager Ed Zuercher.